God bless you all. Thank you. I must say, I'm always wary of the standing ovation before I begin to speak. Peace be with you.
Bishop Robert Barron is the Bishop of Winona, Rochester in Minnesota. Previous to this, he was the Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He's also a celebrated author, theologian, and prominent figure in the world of Christian evangelism.
Christ is the yes to all the promises made to Israel.
His focus is on spreading the Christian message through social media, and his YouTube channel, Word on Fire, has almost 150 million views, making him one of the most influential and widely watched Catholic figures in the world.
Bishop Barron, if you are into theology, the best.
But what made a young Robert Barron want to become a priest in the first place?
It gave me a sense of the reality of God that I've never lost.
And what's his view on the state of Catholicism today?
The church has been in a kind of hand-wringing, mode of, well, what do we know and who are we to tell you, and we're here really to learn more from you. Come on.
I'm Colm Flynn, and I sat down with Bishop Barron here in Rome to find out. Bishop Barron, great to see you again, and thank you so much for doing this interview.
My pleasure.
The last time we met was in beautiful Lisbon for World Youth Day. Now here we are in Rome. The Synod on Synodality. This isn't your first synod. How many have you been at?
Not my first rodeo. I did the Synod on Young People, which was 5 years ago, 2018. So it's my second synod.
How does this compare?
Practically they're very different. 2018, like most synods, we were in that synod hall, which I don't know if you've seen. It's over in the Paul VI, but it's a somewhat claustrophobic room. So there's theater seating. We were in cassocks the whole time. So every day in a heavy black cassock. And you're in a seat that's like the middle seat on an airplane. And you're there the whole time. So this one's a lot more comfortable. I'll say that. We're in the front area of the Paul VI, the big audience hall. They cleared out the chairs and put in these 36 round tables. We're also not wearing cassocks every day, just wearing the black suit. So it's more comfortable, more humane, easier to get through the day.
And we know that there's so many different perceptions of the synod and people online saying different things, but the incredible thing, when you look across the room, the universality of the church that is there. How do you find that, meeting people from every corner of the globe?
It's the best part of it, I think. It started for us at the retreat. This synod, really the synod began with the retreat out in Sacrofano, which is about a half hour north of Rome. But I remember walking into the dining room and there'd be this cacophonous sound, and every table, there's Spanish speakers here, Italian speakers there, German speakers there, French speakers there, English speakers, a mix. And it was the universality of the church in all of its kind of cacophonous wonder. There's no other group or society in the world, I don't think, that could muster that kind of international universality. And that is an extraordinary thing.
The final thing on the synod, that must be incredible then, when you have that diversity of opinions, a diversity of viewpoints, different challenges for the church in different unique parts of the world.
Yeah, and that's an important point. We tend to see the world through the rather myopic lenses of the West. And you realize very quickly it's very different in other parts of the world. And issues that preoccupy us in the Western world often do not preoccupy people in other parts of the world at all. In fact, on the contrary. And that, I think, has been one of the interesting dynamics of the Synod.
Now, if we can talk about you, Bishop Barron, because many of our viewers will know you from your great videos online, millions of views all over the world, but maybe not know so much about your own personal story of how you got to where you are today. Yeah. You grew up in Chicago. You're from Chicago.
Outside Chicago, in the suburbs.
And as a young guy, you were the next big baseball star. That was your dream.
Yeah, sports were the center of my life from the time I was 6, probably until about 16. So 10 years of my life. Baseball was my best sport. I was pretty good at it. I was all-star, most valuable player a couple of years. So I was good at baseball. I was decent at basketball and football. And when I read books about sports. When I watched TV, it was sports. So that was really my life for about 10 solid years. Yeah, and it's true, I wanted to be a pro baseball player. That was my dream when I was a little kid.
So what happened?
I realized I wasn't that talented. No, and I got interested in a lot of other things, but it sort of faded away when other interests came along. But if you looked at a little portrait of me when I was 12 or 13, that was what was on my mind.
Now, when you were 14, and I know you came from a Catholic family and
Yeah.
you had the Catholic tradition and all that, but probably going through the motions, as many Catholics are, part of your identity, but maybe you don't think too much about it.
Yeah.
But then when you were in class, 14 years of age, and something struck you.
Fenwick High School, the spring of 1974, and a young Dominican friar presented one of Aquinas' arguments for God's existence. And I always say, to this day, I don't know why it struck me the way it did, but it did. It gave me a sense of the reality of God that I've never lost. And it started me on a path of exploration, and it filled me with excitement. Whenever I read Ignatius of Loyola, about desolation, consolation, and the idea of, when he read certain texts, he liked them for a while, then it faded away. But other texts he read, and this deep sense of peace and interest and excitement remained. That's what happened to me when I was that age, is reading Aquinas, even though I barely understood it, but it produced in me this sense of peace and consolation. I knew that's what I need to look into. I need to go down that road. And that started me on the road that's led me to sitting right here with you.
Wow. It's incredible that at such a young age, it stirred your intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
But was there a point when it went beyond interesting ideas to you and concepts to something you thought, this is truth, this is real, and I believe it so much that I want to dedicate my entire life to it?
It started with Merton. So I began with Thomas Aquinas, and then very soon after that, maybe 2 years later, I read Merton's Seven-Story Mountain for the first time. And I read that book when I was about 16. And it's a book about someone falling in love with God. And that's what happened to me, I think, as I read it, is Aquinas opened the door to the reality of God, and then Merton led me into this experience of God and the sense of a really personal relationship with God. And that book, to this day, if I pick it up, it fills me with consolation. It fills me with a sense of peace. And it massively struck me when I was 16. The only time in my life I've ever spent a little bit of money to get a first edition of a book was I came across a first edition of The Seven-Story Mountain that's actually signed by Merton. And it's we don't know who it is, but it's to Bob. Now, it could be Bob Gibney, it could be, he had a couple friends named Bob, and it's signed Tom, So I got to get that. So I spent a little bit of money, I'll admit, and I got that book. So Merton deepened and broadened what Aquinas started. And a very interesting thing about that, actually, young Thomas Merton, atheist, agnostic at best, stumbles on Etienne Gilson's book on the spirit of medieval philosophy. And he reads the Catholic intellectual tradition. That's what kicked the door open for Merton. It was Gilson's expose of Thomas Aquinas. So very similar to mine in a way. And then Merton starts down that path and then gets so engaged, he becomes a Trappist monk. And so it was an interesting parallel with me. Reading Merton was my way into the deeper dimensions.
When it went from the head to the heart.
I think so.
The faith and reason.
Yeah.
And then when you were ordained a priest, what was the moment like? Everything had built up to that.
It was wonderful. My priesthood ordination, I remember with great fondness and excitement, my family being there, these great mentors of mine, seminary professors. It was a very joyful day. Now, I don't want to overstate this, but I contrast it with my ordination as a bishop, which was a difficult day. And nothing against LA. They were terrific to me in LA. But I was 55 years old and I was ensconced in Chicago and I had I loved the work I was doing. My ministry was there, my friends, my family. And then suddenly you're going to Los Angeles where I knew absolutely nobody and nothing about it. That day was more challenging, I remember, the day I was ordained a bishop. But my priesthood ordination day, I remember with great joy.
That's funny. The other day I interviewed Archbishop Anthony Fisher from Australia, Sydney, Australia, and I said, what do you love about being a bishop? And he said, well, I really love being a priest. Don't always love being a bishop.
It's tougher,
because it can be tough sometimes.
It's tougher, yeah.
But when you were growing up and you were taking the priesthood seriously, young, curious guy, still with talents, you still could have gone down many other routes. Did you struggle with it? And did you ever doubt the faith? Did you ever think, maybe I should get married and have a family? Maybe I should have a career?
There was a time, I'll tell you, I was at Catholic University in Washington. I was doing my master's in philosophy. I was in the seminary program. But you're 21 years old and you're reading Marx and Nietzsche and Freud for the first time.
They have an impression on you.
Yeah, sure. And there was a time when I thought, I don't know, I've got a lot of doubts, a lot of questions. Would I be better as a professor of philosophy? So there was a time during those years I thought, maybe not not priesthood, maybe I'm better just in the classroom, and I should get a doctorate in philosophy and do that. So it's for a time that beguiled me. But see, my experience of vocation has been just the relentless pursuit of God. That God always came back, and I always knew I would not be happy apart from this adventure. That's what it's felt like to me.
What about marriage and a family?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, probably I would have thought about it and thought, well, that's a different trajectory now, for my life. But God came after me,
When we look around the world today, the Western world, the Catholic Church, the steep decline, and something else that Archbishop Fisher had mentioned, the rise of the nuns, not the N-U-N-S, but the N-O-N-E-S, the census form religion, nun.
Right.
How does it make you feel? As someone who is so passionate and committed to the church and the faith, when you see the fall off?
Yeah, I'm sick about it. And that's why I've been talking about, writing about it for a long time. And see, I see it not just as an intellectual issue. It's that. There's an intellectual dimension. But what I see is the spiritual suffering of people when they follow the crazy new atheists and they say, I came from nothing, I'll go back to nothing, there's no objective moral value, my life has no meaning. Read Richard Dawkins, he lays it out that bluntly. And people go, oh yeah, give it to religion. But then spend time with that philosophy of life. What do you end up with? You end up with this desperately hopeless nihilism. And so I've seen reams of people, who've gone down that path to deep unhappiness, deep alienation. And so I've said to my brothers, even here, this is why the church is doing what it's doing. We're not doing this for our health. We're doing it because we've got a life-saving message. The gospel, it's not just a nice set of ideas. It's a life-saving message. And so that's why the rise of the nuns, now, to be fair, I think they're falling again. And I mean that in a good way. I think people have begun to realize how desperately awful that nihilistic view of the world is. And there's a reawakening. I think we see it in a number of ways. Reawakening of interest in religion. So that's how I feel about that. I feel very passionately about it. And it's the central, at least in the West, it should be the central pastoral focus of the church.
And I've seen you say before that the atheists, from your point of view, you said, they stop asking questions just when it gets interesting.
Just when they get interesting, yes. No, yeah, that's why I never buy this nonsense about, religious people are, pre-scientific and not very bright. On the contrary, it seems to me, that the materialists are great at asking questions that the scientific method can handle. And that's terrific. But there's a lot of life, most of what's really interesting about life, that the scientific method can't handle. And it's very convenient to say, I just won't ask about that. I'm just not interested.
Philosophy begins in wonder.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it begins in this deep hunger of the heart and the soul for meaning and for purpose and for truth and for beauty and for goodness. And the sciences cannot adjudicate any of that. And so I say to young people all the time, don't believe this sort of weird mysticism that says knowledge is reducible to science. Your heart tells you otherwise. And your head, if you give it a little exercise, will also tell you otherwise.
So how does the church try and turn the tide again? How does it go back and evangelize to a hugely secular society now today?
With truth and beauty. And we've got both in spades in Catholicism. So we're a smart religion, and we should not dumb it down, which we have done for way too long. Call upon the intellectual richness of our great tradition and get boldly into that public conversation. Someone I admire very much on the Protestant side, William Lane Craig, who at the height of the new atheist thing got into the debates, and he was drawing on, frankly, much of the Catholic intellectual tradition. We Catholics were pretty bad at it. So draw on all the richness that we have intellectually, and then also draw on the beauty of our tradition, which beguiles people often in a more winsome way. If they're not, maybe they're resistant to truth claims, they're resistant to moral claims, but the beautiful can get into their soul in a way. So begin with truth and beauty, and then have confidence. Much of my adult life, and I say this with regret, the church has been in a kind of hand-wringing, mode of, well, what do we know, and who are we to tell you, and we're here really to learn more from you. And come on. Peter and Paul came to this town a long time ago, and they weren't here, just to listen to Roman culture. I mean, fine. They were here with a message. They were here with a message. euangelion, there's good news. And it's good news that will change the world. And in fact, it worked. The fact that over there, where Peter lies buried to this day, but dominating this once imperial capital is the cross of Jesus. You know, that didn't come welling up from Roman culture. That came from a message that these people brought. We should do our work with the same energy and the same panache and the same confidence.
It's difficult, isn't it, for many priests and bishops around the world, especially when you see the days of good intellectual debate on television, on radio, in public square seem to have gone.
Yeah.
And now you risk suddenly hurting someone's feelings, you risk being cancelled, you risk having the media against you. Is it more difficult now to preach the Catholic Church's beliefs and truths and ideals?
Yes, in the measure that our capacity for real argument, as you suggest, has diminished. When I was a kid, there was a guy, William F. Buckley Jr. in America, who had this show called Firing Line, and it was 1 hour long. And Buckley was this, very kind of interesting, quirky personality, super bright, super articulate, and he had on very smart people from all across the spectrum. He had left, center, right. He had people he agreed with, people he disagreed with. And for 1 hour, at a very high level of conversation, two people with like just a neutral background talked about serious matters. That show was on for 35 years. I remember watching as a little kid and just being beguiled by this guy's words. Like, what does that mean? But the fact that our culture was able to handle that show. Or go back even further in my country, go back to the mid-19th century, and Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas would gather Illinois farmers out in the field. They'd be standing in the mud, and Douglas and Lincoln would engage in 4 hours of high-level public conversation. In our tech culture now, in the social media culture, something has been lost along those lines. Our capacity to make and sustain a real argument, and not a soundbite, not a little put down, not a clever quip, but an argument,
Yes.
We've not lost it entirely, but I think we've got a couple generations now that don't even know what a good argument is.
And that's what you were trying to do with Word on Fire on social media and on YouTube. We just had World Mission Sunday, and you have become a digital missionary in a way. When our last interview we did in Lisbon, short interview, just a few minutes long, and so many people watched it, and I was surprised by the mixed reaction. One hand, I love Bishop Barron, what a great message. The other hand, he shouldn't be preaching this, he should be saying this. Do you read the praise? Do you read the criticism? And does it affect you?
Well, some of it, sure, you become aware of. I don't go looking for it, I think it just comes with the territory. If you're a public intellectual, especially in a religious context, of course you're going to get, a wide variety of responses. Something I'm actually rather proud of, I don't know any other figure in the Catholic world who's attacked more from both the left and the right than I am. And I'm happy about that. Because, I nailed my colors to the mast a long time ago. I'm not hiding anything. I'm a Vatican II Catholic. I love the interpretive tradition of the great post-conciliar popes up to Francis, but including and especially John Paul II. I'm for the Catechism of 1992. I don't like Catholic liberalism. I don't like radical traditionalism. Those are my colors, My theological heroes, Thomas Aquinas, among the fathers, Irenaeus, Origen, Augustine, Newman in the 19th century, Balthasar 20th century. That's my world. That's what I stand for. And I know in the church today, there are enemies on both sides of that. There are right-wing enemies of that and left-wing enemies.
Where did that deep division come from, and how is it affecting the church, do you think?
Well, in a way, we've been in a civil war since Vatican II. That Vatican II in some ways is a kind of watershed, and that those two camps emerged, in the wake of the council. I think the great contribution of John Paul II and Benedict and Francis and Paul VI was to provide a coherent interpretation of Vatican II that shows it as a development, indeed, in continuity with the past, but stating things in a fresh way in dialogue with the modern world. And I think that's the right path. Now, what opened up once that path emerged was critics on the left, critics on the right. And that civil war has been going on for a long time. It's still going on. Exacerbated now by the social media, which have made it louder and more rancorous. No, not to my mind, not so much objectively, but I think the social media echo chamber, which encourages the one-liner quip and the mean-spirited comment, the anonymity of it, all that has produced this kind of vile echo chamber. I think that's worse than it was. I mean, are the disagreements worse than they were, let's say, in the 60s or 70s or 80s? Heck, when I was coming of age, trust me, there were disagreements. Trust me, a lot of people were critical of John Paul II. You know, there's like people today that will say, oh, you know, poor Pope Francis, he's getting, you know, attacked.
Yes.
Well, okay, but John Paul II and Benedict, believe me, were getting attacked like crazy.
People
So
just
that's
weren't
not
as
really new.
They weren't as aware of it, maybe because it wasn't on their social media feed
Right.
every
Yes,
day.
that's the difference. And so it didn't have quite the same resonance as it has today.
Word on Fire.
Yeah.
Such an empire you have built. What are you hoping to do in the future with it, or any ideas? Or
Well, you know, the ongoing growth of the Word on Fire Institute is important to me, which is a training really of lay evangelists. We've begun online, but we have all kinds of plans to expand that. I've spoken before, and we're making some progress on this idea of an order of priests that would be dedicated to what I think is the needful thing today, which is the outreach to an increasingly skeptical culture, outreach to the unaffiliated. I think that's the requirement of our time spiritually, and I'd like to see an order develop along those lines. We have, you know, plans for various projects for Word on Fire, and it's done, you know, very well, thank God.
what about you yourself, Bishop? Started off in Chicago, bright-eyed, looking at baseball stars. That's my future. Your plan, life changes, the tapestry of life. You never knew you would be sitting here today as a bishop.
Right.
What are your dreams and hopes for the future?
Well, I mean, I think to continue my work as an evangelist. I'm, you know, bishop of a diocese that I love. I've been there now a little over a year, and you know that's the job the church has given me to do, and I'm very pleased to do it. So I'm certainly that's my future given to me by the Pope. But beyond that, I would say, you know, the ongoing work of Word on Fire.
Is it difficult to do the two, to manage
really.
a media empire like that? And
No, because I've got so many good people at Word on Fire, you know, 65 strong, who do most of the, you know, practical day-to-day things. I've been doing this now for over 10 years because I was rector of Mundelein Seminary, full-time administrative job. I was auxiliary bishop of the largest diocese in the country, LA, full-time administrative job. Now I'm bishop of a diocese. So I've been a full-time church administrator for like 12 years. And during that time, Word on Fire has grown and so on. So no, I don't really find it hard to juggle those two things.
Finally, what gives you hope? Because you mentioned we have truth, we have beauty, but the church has always had that, and yet we still see such decline. And I remember once I had a friend in New York who was going through a hard time, and I said, pray about it. And she said, how do you pray?
Yeah, right.
Like even the base level, foundation is not there. When you look at the church today, what gives you hope?
A lot of things. And we've talked about the negative side of the social media, and that's true. But, you know, look, I use the social media. I love the social media. And, you know, talk about Lisbon. When I was there a few months ago, and I'm wandering around Lisbon, the number of people from all over the world that are responding to the work we do at Word on Fire. Being here in Rome at the Synod, I mean, every day, people from all corners of the world. Well, that means there's something in Catholicism that is still very compelling to people. And that when it's laid out in a way that's intellectually satisfying and aesthetically pleasing and morally compelling, they respond to it. And that gives me a lot of hope, you know? And I don't believe this new atheist nonsense. And I don't believe that's going to, in the long run, hold people's hearts and minds. And the church, look, I look out at the city of Rome here, you know, and we've been around for a long time, and we've been through a lot worse than we're going through right now. So we will endure. So Christ gives me hope, and the Holy Spirit gives me hope. The fact that we've been given this great message, we've been entrusted with it, but we're under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and we've been through a lot worse, and there's still nothing better on the table. There's no fresher fish on the market than Christianity. It's still the most beautiful, compelling message that we got.
Bishop Barron, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.